Hellenistic philosophy centered on the search for a criterion, an infallible measuring stick used to distinguish reality from appearance. The Stoics believed they had identified this standard in catalepsis, a cognitive impression so distinct and undeniable that it theoretically guaranteed its own accuracy. For dogmatic philosophers, establishing a fact required the scale to tip. They relied on evidence for a claim definitively outweighing the evidence against it. The Pyrrhonian skeptics approached this metric through Isostheneia, a state defined by the equal persuasive weight of opposing arguments. Rather than trying to tip the balance, the Pyrrhonian intentionally places identical stones on both sides. By confronting every claim with an equally compelling counterclaim, they force the intellectual scale into a permanent gridlock. This method differs from modern Cartesian skepticism. The ancient Pyrrhonian does not dream up hypothetical demons or manufacture artificial illusions to trick the senses. They act as passive observers, acknowledging the natural, irresolvable discrepancies that already exist in the world. In the 1st century BCE, Anaximenes formalized this process into a system known as the 10 modes. These organized rows of papyrus reflect the rigorous transmission of the modes, which were designed to systematically prove that perception is strictly relative to the observer and their environment. One mode demonstrates that an object yields different realities depending on the distance of the viewer, or whether the eye viewing it belongs to a human or a different species. The skeptic accepts what they see, but pits one valid sensory impression directly against a conflicting, equally valid sensory impression. This mechanical process applies to logic as well. Every rational proof constructed by a dogmatist is immediately paired with a counterproof carrying the same rational force. Confronted with this deadlock, the engine of the intellect seizes, and the mind loses its ability to select one side over the other. When arguments reach true isostheneia, rational assent becomes impossible, forcing the brain into a state of non-determination. The formal output of this deadlock is a cognitive state the Greeks called epoché, or the complete suspension of judgment. In a state of epoché, the mind reflects the world's appearances without absorbing them as underlying truths. The Stoics launched a severe counterattack, accusing the skeptics of apraxia, total physical and cognitive paralysis. Dogmatists assumed that survival requires absolute belief in objective reality. To them, a mind without conviction is a body unable to move. The skeptics answered with pragmatism, demonstrating that a person can live fluidly based purely on appearances without internal belief. They codified this in the fourfold observances. First, the skeptic yields to the natural guidance of their senses and to biological affections. When hunger or thirst arises, they drink and eat. Second, they adhere to local laws and customs and apply technical expertise. They navigate society by its rules without asserting that those rules are universally correct. Pulling a hand away from a hot fire does not require a metaphysical theory of thermodynamics. The sensation of heat is sufficient to guide the action. While the dogmatist requires absolute certainty to take a single step, the skeptic navigates the surface world frictionless. Epoché provides a pragmatic mechanism for surviving an uncertain universe. All dogmatic philosophy is built on a rigid binary, the division between truth and falsehood. Dogmatism demands that objective truth is a coin that must eventually land flat on one face or the other. A separate faction, the academic skeptics, attempted to offer an epistemological compromise. This historical schism originated here, in the physical remnants of Plato's Academy. An academic scholar named Carneades developed a middle ground metric called to Parthenon, translated as the plausible or the probable. The academics argued that while absolute truth might be unknowable, humans can safely play the odds by trusting highly convincing sensory impressions. The Pyrrhonian skeptics rejected this reliance on plausibility, finding it lacked intellectual rigor. While the academics asserted that knowledge is impossible, the Pyrrhonian noted a paradox. Claiming to know that you know nothing is its own form of dogmatism. The Pyrrhonian refuses to let the coin fall. They use the phrase "no more this than that" to hold the intellect in perpetual balance. True skepticism requires rejecting the safety of probabilities and existing within the tension of the unprovable. The cold mechanics of skeptical logic are directed toward a specific human objective, a telos. The telos of Pyrrhonism is ataraxia, an absolute freedom from psychological disturbance. Ataraxia operates like a state of unbroken mental surface tension. External inputs and conflicting arguments rest on the surface without causing internal ripples. Sextus Empiricus explained how this tranquility is achieved through an anecdote about Apelles the painter. Apelles became frustrated when he could not accurately render the foam on a horse's mouth. Eventually, he surrendered and threw the sponge he used to wipe his brushes at the canvas. The sponge struck the canvas and produced the exact desired effect. This representation was achieved only after Apelles abandoned the anxious, intentional effort to paint it. This artistic metaphor reveals that intellectual turmoil stems exclusively from the intentional pursuit of objective truth. When the thinker surrenders the struggle for absolute truth and accepts the suspension of epoché, tranquility follows automatically, like a shadow following a body. This leads to the final paradox of ancient skepticism, the nature of its own arguments. Dogmatic philosophies operate by hoarding truths and stacking them into permanent worldviews. Skepticism, conversely, relies on transient tools. The mechanics are radically self-consuming. They are designed to disintegrate upon completion. Sextus Empiricus described his own writings as a climbing ladder. Skeptical tools like the 10 modes function as disposable rungs on a ladder designed to escape the anxiety of dogmatism. Once the heights of Epoché and Ataraxia are reached, the true skeptic must violently kick the ladder away. To hold on to the logical proof of skepticism is to immediately become a dogmatist again. The mechanics of suspension inevitably lead to the dissolution of the philosophy itself, leaving behind nothing but pure, unbothered stillness.